Welcome to, believe it or not, episode number 50. I'm really having trouble grasping that. We started this, as you know, right when the pandemic started, and here we are at episode number 50 now. This is incredible. I want to give everybody just a little bit of heads up that we had a last minute change in our guest for tonight, but not in the whiskeys. Okay. The last minute change is that instead of Mark Vierthaler, he had something come up that he could not cancel. We have Jake Wheatley with us. Jake, raising your hand. Jake, say hello.
Hello, hello.
So Jake is, for everybody to know, Jake is the VP of Sales and Marketing for Whiskey Delback. By the way, I want to point out for everybody, you don't say Delback, you say Whiskey Delback. Okay, that's an important part of their marketing and branding, and Jake can even talk about that. Jake has been in the business for over 20 years. He's been with Gallo, Pernod Ricard. He loves Whiskey Delback, their approach to whiskey making. And Jake actually is in Phoenix, so he's not far from where Delback itself is. So Jake, what are you actually drinking right now? That looked like a good drink you had there, Jake. Can you tell me what that was, please?
This is a Whiskey Delbach classic freezer door old fashioned.
Okay, what is a freezer door old fashioned?
Okay, so basically, I take a full bottle of Whiskey Delbach classic, like so.
In the middle there. Yep, got it.
Yep. And then I'll take about 2 ounces out of the top, drink those neat, and then put about 2 ounces of simple syrup back into the bottle and 24 dashes of Angostura bitters. Restopper it,
24,
shake it up, and then leave it in the refrigerator. And then all I got to do is just pull it out, and it's 3 ounces over ice in a glass, and a couple of cherries and a piece of orange peel, and it's a piece of cake.
Wow, that's beautiful. That is beautiful. You got to come up to Chicago and just make that for me.
Strongly recommend. It doesn't take up a lot of space, and it's just take 2 ounces out, place it with simple syrup and 24 shakes of bitters, and you're off to the races.
Okay, I'm sure people have been writing that down. Okay, that is awesome. Eric, can you do me a favor? Post the order one more time. Somebody just said that they don't have the order with them. So Jake, can you tell us where you are right now and where the distillery is, please?
Okay, so I am currently in my house in Phoenix, Arizona. This is a background behind me. This is actually the bar at the distillery down in Tucson, where we have our guests and host people, and they did a great job building this gorgeous bar. So it's not that cool. It's not in my house. The distillery, Whiskey Delbach, the distillery is down in Tucson, Arizona, right off of Forbes Boulevard, right off the 10, about an hour and a half south of Phoenix. So it's a piece of cake to get down there. We are a 10-person company. We've been at this since 2011. We've iterated through a lot of different versions of the company, a couple different versions of the whiskey, hopefully getting better with each iteration. We've got a humble yet proud location. We're just in a business park. If you drove past, you wouldn't even know we were there. But we make a lot of great whiskey in our warehouse and out back. And we actually do quite a pretty robust tour business for not having a super sexy place to visit,
Nice.
like some competitors of whom I'm deeply jealous.
It's funny. You see some people who have an incredible budget, and they're well funded. I want to tell everybody that since we do have 5 whiskeys to taste tonight. Well, Jake and I are talking here. You can get started. Okay, we're going to get started now on the first one, which is the Whiskey Delbach Classic. Okay, but sure. Jake and I are going to be talking, and Jake, from what I understand, your core range. I mean, what we're talking about here, these are single malt whiskeys, right? That's your core.
With the exception of the rye, which we launched a year ago. Whiskey Delbach is, we are absolutely a craft distillery, and we specialize in American single malt whiskeys made from 100% malted barley. The only exception to that, of course, is the Sentinel Rye, which we'll finish up with tonight. Be happy to tell you all about what it is, why we did it, what makes it different from other ryes. But yes, other than that, we are an American single malt whiskey in the Sonoran Desert.
And your source of the barley, where does your barley come from?
We get the bulk of our barley, I believe, from it's a producer. I believe they're called Tex Malt. I have not had the opportunity to meet them. They're in Fort Worth. We have great relationships with them. They have very close relationships with their barley producers, many of whom are in Texas, from what I understand, which surprised me a little bit, because I wouldn't think that Texas was wholly friendly to the barley grain. Apparently, Tex Malt does get a lot of their barley from Texas, if not all of it.
Yeah, they actually we interviewed Balcones a while
Okay.
back,
Yeah.
and Balcones actually worked with University of Texas at Austin to help create strains of barley that would grow and grow well in Texas. You know,
Really?
yeah,
That's
yeah, they
true.
did, and actually their flagship is called Lineage. Some of their barley comes from Scotland, and some of the barley comes from Texas. That's what they consider their lineage. It's an American single
Well,
malt.
it's a good story.
Yeah, and I'm sure that you obviously you know Balcony as well because it's another American single malt producer
Yeah.
from a hot
Mhm.
climate,
Yep.
you
Yep.
know,
Yep.
which is
Yep.
a big deal. So all your barley comes from Tex malt. Okay.
That is my understanding. Yep.
Okay. All right.
And
And yes,
no, no, go ahead.
no. And then the other thing that stands out about your company and about your whiskeys is that your story has to do with the fact that you came from really just the brainstorm of smoking the barley with mesquite
Yeah.
instead of with peat, correct?
Yeah. So our one of our founders, Stephen Paul, he was a he was and still is a custom furniture maker who's living in Tucson for almost all his entire life. And he worked with Arizona hardwoods, of which mesquite is probably the most famous and the most stubborn. It is not an easy wood to work with. So he'd come home from work with scraps of mesquite wood to cook his steaks with his wife. And one night, they were sitting out back, and they love Scotch, and his wife particularly loves the Isla Southwestern Scotches with their heavy peat notes.
Mhm.
And she just asked a very innocent question in 2006, which is, I wonder if you could mesquite a whiskey instead of peat a whiskey. And that innocent question launched a hobby, which launched a short career as a bootlegger. And then his daughter got involved and said, we have to make you legal. She came home from New York and got him the paperwork so that he could take his 5 gallon still, and they could buy 100 gallon still, and start making it and selling it legally in Tucson. And that was in 2011.
Wow. And so are all of the single malts are all the single malts smoked?
No, they are not. In fact, starting with classic, if you want, I can sort of
Yeah, please do.
before we jump into the whiskey, I'll try to give a very brief overview of Stephen and our current approach to making single malt. A lot of times when Stephen is telling his story, he'll make reference to the Scottish model of whiskey making. And I, wanted him to go into greater depth about that because he's so close to it. He knows exactly what that is. And I'm sure most of you do too. But a lot of people don't know what that means. They just know that Scotch comes from Scotland, and it, probably leads people down the wrong road. So what he wanted to do is he wanted to use the highest quality Scotches from Scotland as a quality benchmark, not a taste benchmark, but a quality benchmark. So he decided to start first looking at how do they distill. One of the things he first started with is he wanted to do off-grain fermentation and distillation. So stop me if you guys already know what this is,
No,
but
please do. Please. It's
okay.
okay,
So
go.
when they're making the effectively the wort before they make the actual beer, they'll grind up, and they'll make he'll put all the dried barley into that wort. What he will do though is before he begins the fermentation, we filter all of the grain back out of the liquid, and we'll ferment just the filtered liquid, and then we distill only the filtered liquid. There's a couple reasons we do this, but it really comes to taste. It's not the most efficient way to do it. It's much cheaper to leave the grain in there. But that off-grain decision makes for a lighter, more floral taste to the whiskey. And it is a lower yield as well because, some of that grain that you pull out has some liquid in it. but it is tastier. If you leave the grain in, the tannins that are in the grain will make it a little bit more sharp and tannic on the back end. So in an effort to make the best tasting whiskey we can, we choose to off grain ferment and distill. What's the next thing that we do? We will double distill in a 500-gallon copper pot still. So we don't do any column distillation. It's strictly copper pot still, and we only go twice. We don't go 3 times. We only go twice. So that pot distillation, because, I'm sure as you guys know, column distillation creates an incredibly pure spirit, but it pulls out every congener it can, which can make for a light spirit, but it also removes flavor. So we want some of those congeners and flavors to remain. And because we make such narrow cuts when we're making our whiskey, we actually need some more of those congeners because we don't take as much as the head and the tails as some of our other competitors might. So we want to try to leave some of that flavor, in.
And what is what is it aged in? Tell us about your barrels.
That's an excellent segue. Thank you. So once we pull it out of the still, we will age it in 12 to 15 months in new white American oak 15-gallon barrels. And those barrels have got a medium plus toast and a 3-level char.
So only 15-gallon.
Correct. And I can get to why we do.
So now,
and I can get to
something that
why
surprises me. You've said something that surprises me here, because usually when we're dealing with whiskeys that are aged in such small barrels, they appear to be over oaked. Okay. So that rarely do I get like surprised in one of these things. That surprised me, because this is not, in my opinion, over oaked at all. Can you explain why that is?
So that's an excellent point, and that's something that Mark harps on quite a bit whenever he talks about our process. 15-gallon barrels tend to invite a lot of discussion. We'll put it that way. Lots of discussion. But there's a reason why we do that. In Arizona, where we are, the temperatures are so high, our angel share is almost 4 times the average of what you'll find in Kentucky. We can lose 15% of our spirit due to the high temperatures in Arizona.
What percentage about per each year?
About 10 to 15%, and the average is about 4% in a place like Kentucky.
Right.
So because we are dealing with that environmental factor, rather than fight it, we try to roll with it. And so he's like, okay, I can take narrower cuts. I can put it into a smaller barrel that's full of flavor. And because of the huge diurnal shifts in temperature, 40 degrees sometimes in the course of a day, there's a tidal effect inside the barrel, meaning it pushes the whiskey really hard into the wood, and then it pulls the whiskey out just as hard out of that wood. So we get a lot. The barrel gives us a lot in just 12 to 15 months. And we do 12 to 15 months, one, because to your point, we don't want to over oak, because in a smaller barrel like that, the ratio of wood to whiskey is much higher. And if you leave it in a 15-gallon barrel for an extended period of time, you're going to get a wood bomb. That's not what we're going for. However, we are working against the clock, and we can't take 4 years in a barrel in our temperature and environment, because it'll all evaporate. So we've got to work against the clock, get as much flavor as we can, keep the whiskey as honest as we can. And we still have to accept 10 to 15% angel share unless we start putting humidifiers in our rack house, which I'm not opposed to doing.
Right. Well, it's funny because we talked about this with the people at we talked about this with the people at Balcones. We talked about this with the people who rep M&H, Milk and Honey, out of Israel. We've talked about this with Amrut, in India. I mean, all of you are doing stuff in hot climates, so clearly, it's very different than you dealing with Scotland, and so obviously the age matters. So that I'm really glad that you mentioned the 15-gallon barrels, and that we had this discussion early on, because that actually explains a lot about your process given your climate. Okay.
Right.
I want us to move on to the second one while we're talking here, because this first one had no smoke at all. Okay.
Right.
First one had no smoke. Okay.
Right.
And now we're starting to go on to mesquite. Okay.
So just one quick more comment.
Please.
Someone just to the comments. I just wanted to say, someone made a comment about not only is the heat, but it's the dryness. And that is exactly right. If there was a lot of humidity, if we're in Miami, we probably wouldn't have the angel share losses that we get. But because it's so dry, we face a particularly interesting climb uphill. So we've got to work as quickly as we can to try to bring the flavorful whiskey to you. So shifting to Dorado, the number one thing that we probably do is what we did to create this flavor is basically we will when we're malting the barley, when we got to dry it out before we grind it up and make the beer, is we dry it over a bed of mesquite wood, and we'll
For
burn
how
it
long?
out.
For how long?
It's usually I would say it's usually a couple hours. If I show up into the distillery at 7 o'clock in the morning and you can smell the wood burning in the parking lot, I don't think the drying really takes that long. We've got a special apparatus actually we had custom built that really allows the product to dry quickly, but also infuse with the smoke, and it works really well.
So
But
then you're
that's basically
malting. So you malt the barley yourselves there. You're doing the malting
for the
yourselves.
for the Dorado, for the smoked part of that malt, yes.
Right.
So our mash bill for the Dorado is as follows. It's a 60-40 split of unsmoked malt, which we get from Texas, and smoked malt, which we do in-house. It's a 60-40 split. And then we
Okay.
throw that into the fermenter after filtering it, of course, and pulling the grain out. We put that into the fermenter and then distiller and then the barrel.
Okay. That explains a lot. That
Now,
explains
when
a
it
lot.
comes out of the barrel, though, we blend it a little bit differently. So we start with a 60-40 mash bill. Our final blend is a 70-30 split of that mesquited, sort of mixed mesquited distillate, and then 30% just straight classic blend. So
Got it.
we did that because over time we realized that original recipe was really intense from a smoke standpoint. It was mesquite, it wasn't peat, but it was really intense. And over time we've realized if we could dial the smoke just down to a level where it's present but not overwhelming, it tends to have a better reception from a wider group of people.
Okay. So one thing you don't know, and by the way, just a quick housekeeping thing for everybody. Since we have 5 samples, we might actually go to, instead of an hour, maybe an hour and 15 tonight, because we don't want to rush this, and Jake is giving us a ton of good information here. Just wanted to give everybody that heads up. But Jake, one thing you don't know is that several of us have actually competed in barbecue competitions.
Oh, right on. Okay. Yeah.
And
all
Eric,
all Texas barbecue. Yep.
right. And Eric wrote right there, if they're smoking the peat at 7 a.m., what time do they put the brisket on? Because I was thinking that too.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's
I mean,
something that's something that we talk about a lot, actually. One of the things we want to do in Texas is we really want to increase our exposure there. I think in terms of the consumer down there already knows what mesquite is and probably already loves it. So if we could evangelize in Texas a little bit more, I think it would be to our benefit with Dorado. We've got decent coverage in Total Wine, but we have a lot of work to do outside that chain in Texas.
Yeah, well, Texas, I mean, it's an interesting market there. It's obviously it's huge, it's gigantic, and a lot of people want to be in there. And yeah, the possibility of partnering with some sort of barbecue provider there or something like that. It's
I think it would be so much fun. I would get such a kick out of it. We could send our barrels over to them. Maybe they could smoke something in one of the barrels. I think it would be so much fun. I think we could have a lot of fun.
That sounds like a blast, actually.
Yeah. So the Dorado's 92 proof, as is the classic. We chose that proofing basically because we like the higher proof we think it makes for better cocktails. Makes for, especially if you're into mixology, and a lot of the mixologists here in Phoenix lean into drink making with our whiskeys, which we're thrilled with. I mean, we don't want to be dogmatic in any way about it. We want to innovate. We want people to play with our whiskeys and see what tastes best to them. Rocks are great. Meat is great. But cocktails are phenomenal too. So we're very pro.
I don't know if you noticed in the chat, one of the earliest comments was from Russ. He actually went to an old-fashioned class at Whiskey Delback in Tucson. He was there.
Oh, terrific. Was Jana your teacher?
So Russ, if you want to just briefly unmute if you're paying attention.
I am paying attention. It was an awesome class. It was super fun. I went with my wife. It was a beautiful space. I do not remember the teacher's name, but I remember having an excellent time, and I would absolutely
That's all that matters. As long as you had a good time. That's all that matters.
Yeah. And in Russ's comment, I like that he says here that they made a point to stir the old fashioned 50 times. So not sure
Yep.
that's fascinating.
That's, proper dilution is key to a good old fashioned.
Yeah, I don't know if I have the patience for that, but thank you, Russ, for that comment. I appreciate it. So I got to tell you, the nice thing, one of the nice things about the Dorado here is that just like the concept of not being too oaky or over oaked, this is not too smoky. It's very
Yeah.
approachable, and
Yes.
that's why I can see that even a cocktail with this would have a character to it that would be a little bit different from a character with an unsmoked whiskey.
Right.
Right. Yeah, no, that's very, very nice. So tell us about the barrels for this. I mean, is this also being aged in the same barrels as the classic?
Yes. So we like our primary barrel aging regimen is the same for all of our base whiskeys. We try to use we have a little bit of second use for these barrels, but it's like 90% first use barrels. We sell the reused barrels frequently. We have a barrel sale going on this weekend, $75 a barrel.
Is there a different market?
Is there a different
market? Is there a different market for the barrels that had the mesquite smoked whiskeys in them than from the ones that didn't? Because I would think that would be different use.
You know what? It might actually, and it's funny that you asked that because we have worked with a number of breweries actually that love being able to either shop the smoked barrel or the unsmoked barrel, and they'll make beer out of it. There's an outfit called 8-Bit Ale Works down in Tucson, and one of the things we're doing is gave them some of our barrels. They made some beer, 2 or 3 different kinds of beer in it. They brought us back the barrels, and now we're aging mesquited whiskey back in those barrels that made chocolate imperial stout, pumpkin imperial stout, and all these different s'mores, all these different flavors, and we're trying to see what those are going to come out with, and we're going to bottle them in little 375s and sell them out of the distillery. So we have a lot of interest in those from beer makers. I don't know that we've gotten a specific smoked barrel request out of other spirit makers. I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, I was just curious.
No,
because it adds something to
it.
Yeah,
because it's a 15-gallon barrel, it's probably a different market, right? It's not like the standard 55-gallon Kentucky bourbon that everyone in their buys, and that's good. They should be used. It's not a slam, but I'd have to ask Mark that question.
Got it. Okay, so back to the whiskeys here. So the 2 flagships, of course, are the classic and the Dorado. Okay, and then we're going on to 2 essentially what are specialty releases. Okay,
yes.
And the first specialty release, okay, is the Distiller's Cut, which is 46.5, right? Yeah, the right.
Actually, I think it might be a little higher than that. Is that right?
Eric, did we maybe
I'm looking at a bottle that says 110 proof on it. I could be
Eric,
looking
is
at
the label maybe wrong? Because the label I have, we could be I could have made a mistake here. Eric?
Yeah, some of the ones I had updated it to the 50.
Oh,
I think the 55. That was the one we talked about when we poured. Some of them were correct, some of them were not.
okay, so that's the fall. Okay, this is very important, everybody. The fall release, some of the labels that we printed. Of course, these are not TTB authorized labels, but some of the labels that we have printed here are incorrect. On the fall release, it should say, you said 55%, right?
Right. It's a 110 proof.
Okay, be careful, everybody. This one's a higher proof. Okay, thank you very much for pointing that out. So tell us about your fall release. Yep. Tell us about the fall release and how it is different from the Dorado and the classic.
So these are really, really fun whiskeys. So the Distiller's Cuts are strictly for our whiskey club members.
Okay.
And we do 3 a year. We do a spring cut, a summer cut, and a fall cut. So this is our last one of the year. The fall cut tends to be a mesquite distillate smoked whiskey. The spring and the summers are unsmoked. So everyone's always looks forward to the smoked one in the fall because just Our guys do really good work with mesquite. So we call this one Dustin's blend. So we have a distiller named Dustin, and he is the one who decided the final blend for this specific whiskey. And again, like I said, it's a mesquite smoked base. Initially, it's matured in that new white American oak, which we discussed a moment ago, and then finished in tawny port barrels.
Aha, that's it. I was getting something here. This is wow.
And then here's the curveball on the end of that pitch. Then they blend a separate batch of mesquite smoked single malt that was finished in Sauterne barrels, and they blend the two of those together. So this is a Sauterne tawny port finished blend. The total aging onto all in is probably 22 months. So call it probably about a year in new white American oak, and then at least another year in the various finishing barrels, either tawny port or Sauterne.
And let me, okay, I'm gonna ask you a few questions before we go to the questions that are posted here.
Please.
So since you're doing your original aging in the 15-gallon barrels, okay, obviously port and Sauterne are not made in 15-gallon barrels. So
correct. So we buy, we'll buy barrels from those producers in the sizes that they typically produce in.
Right, and they just dump it.
We end up using a finishing barrel that's very different from our primary aging vessel. Yes.
Right. Now that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned your whiskey club. Can you tell us what your whiskey club is? Who has access to it? What happens to those bottles?
So the whiskey club is it's a pretty straightforward club. We're going to make it even more straightforward in the next couple of months. But right now you can just buy a single bottle of any of the distiller's cuts through the distillery, and that will give you a base membership. Then we've got 2 subscription models as well, where you pay up front and you get a bottle of each of the 3 over the course of the year, or the most deluxe plan where you get 3 bottles of each of the cuts.
Does this have to be at the distillery though, or are these mailed to you?
Right now, if you live in Arizona,
there's only one right answer. There's only one right answer to this question,
Right now, we only fulfill within Arizona, either pickup or mail within Arizona.
Okay, got it.
We're trying to figure out a way. So we just went online and started selling in 41 states using a company helping us called Big Thirst. And it gets basically fulfilled through another retailer. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Big Thirst.
There are a few companies like that around the country that do that.
There are several out there. And it's all goes through the 3rd tier. It's just that you end up selling, you end up getting fulfilled out of a retailer in any number of states that all they do is mail bottles to people. So it satisfies the 3-tier rule. We're trying to figure out how we can keep control of our whiskey club and not outsource it to a third party.
Right.
To make sure that the quality never screws up. And we're just not there yet. And it's funny you mentioned Westwood earlier. They've actually been mentoring us a little bit on how to run a whiskey club because they've got a very successful one. And they even told us, they said, start and get Arizona right. And then you can figure out the additional wrinkles.
That makes sense.
Outside your state without just handing it over to somebody and hoping they don't screw you up. Because what you don't want is a crappy whiskey club experience. If someone has a problem with their club's gate, they'll never rejoin, and it's not easy to get folks to commit to that.
Plus you get bad word. Plus you get bad word of mouth going. It just doesn't work.
Right. That's the
right. Exactly. And believe me, we've had this issue before. Actually, it's funny. We about 2 years ago we were tasting Dad's Hat Rye out of Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania is it's a controlled state, through their state liquor control board.
Yeah. And
one of the samples that Herman sent us was a distillery only release, cask strength, single barrel. It was like 63.2. We couldn't get it, but my family lives in Pennsylvania. So I had him ship a case to my mother, to my 80-something-year-old mother,
Right.
And she was
Exactly.
And so the next time I was in Philly, I picked it up from her. The funny thing is that I told her it was coming. And then 2 weeks later, she said, Gil, why did I just get a box of whiskey here?
Right.
Like, you remember. So there are ways for us to acquire, and I don't know if you've been paying attention to the chat, but several people here might be in touch with you afterwards about this stuff. And
Please, please, please.
Yeah.
Nothing would make me happy.
Those of
Nothing
you
would
who are going to Arizona, please make sure to remind me later, shoot me an email, something like that, and I will put you in direct contact with Jake and you can figure things out.
please, please.
All right, so Jake, by the way, I got to tell you that the legs on this are just incredible. This is just a beautiful whiskey. Can you tell, one person asked a question, do you know any details on the type of tawny port or the sauternes, or is that more of a Mark question?
Well, it's probably more of a Mark question, but I can try to answer it. What's the specific question about?
I
Like,
want
what
to
are
know
the-
if you know any details just about the, if you could tell us anything more about the port or the sauterne. If not, that's okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. I should have that answer. We should at least know who our barrel suppliers are. Mark would certainly know that, so I
Okay.
apologize.
No problem.
Yeah.
No problem at all. I got to tell you that was just I loved that, and even at the 110, it didn't need any water. I mean, it's still, there's something bright about it,
Yeah.
something fresh, very drinkable. And the thing is that I can see how it's even good on a hot day, and you guys are in hot weather down there. There's something. It's beautiful. I really love it.
I'll pass that on to Dustin. I think, one of the, barrel proof is actually kind of tricky. The way Mark explains it to me, he's like, because it's not hard for a barrel proof whiskey to get out of balance. The barrels that you choose to actually bottle at barrel proof really do need to be evaluated one at a time, because you're not really blending them that much. And just, it can really, really change, especially once you proof it down. So they're very, very careful. We don't want to just throw out a bunch of barrel proof stuff and just assume it's going to sell because it's really strong.
Right.
He's very, very thoughtful about which barrels get released.
Can we confirm what the proof is on the Normandy, since we had the error on the last one? I want to make sure.
It's 97. It's 97 proof.
Okay, so the number on here on mine is correct, 48%. By the way, are you a Phoenix Suns fan?
You know what? I have to confess that I am from New Jersey originally.
Okay,
So
that's fine.
the bulk of my sports are back to New York, but I will say I am rooting for the D-backs in the series for sure.
Well, the reason why I mentioned that is because in the chat, Michael Bloom, and I don't know if you've heard of the 50 state blend, but Michael Bloom is the brains behind the 50 state blend. Turns out that his brother is the voice of the Phoenix Suns on the radio.
Oh, really?
And he's a fan of Whiskey Delback. So there's another Phoenix
Please
connection.
absolutely pass on his contact information. We would be happy to send him a couple of gratis bottles just to say hello, and certainly invite him back down to the distillery anytime he likes.
You see, people, it pays off to participate in the chat and to pay attention.
Yes.
You see, now Bloom's brother is going to be getting a bunch of free whiskey. Just because of that.
We'll get him some holiday bottles that he can share and pass around. Great gift him if he wants to.
God, it's amazing. This is just beautiful. I feel so good about this. So tell us about Normandy.
Normandy. This is certainly one of our most awarded whiskeys, and it is Mark's admitted favorite. So this is an annual limited release. It is American single malt whiskey. It starts off, it's an unsmoked distillate, as we discussed, so it's the classic base, and it is aged again for 12 to 15 months in those new American white oak barrels. However, then what he does is we finish for 12 to 18 months, depending on when it goes into the barrel, in Calvados apple brandy barrels. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Calvados or had the opportunity to try Calvados. It's very different, but it's a delicious spirit. So, because the Calvados region is within the coastal region of Normandy, that's where our name Normandy comes from. This it's got an ABV of, like I said, it's 97 proof, 48.5%. A lot of stone fruit, just a touch of caramel, a little bit of citrus or citric acid possibly coming from the apples or through there. Or pardon me, I should say malic acid coming from the apples through there. And obviously this is mixable, but Mark really prefers just to have one large cube on this and really savor it.
It's funny. Todd Coe just commented on something I was going to say, is that I'm getting caramel I'm getting caramel. I'm getting like,
Caramel,
the
caramel
caramel
chips.
apples,
Mhm. Yep.
maybe it's that time of year because I had a caramel apple like 2 days ago, somebody, but
Yep.
there's something about the fall season now
Mhm.
and caramel apples.
Caramel
And
dip
I guess that's the
apples. Yep.
Calvados, right? That's coming from the Calvados, right?
A big part of that is the Calvados, but another part of it is definitely the level of toast and char that's coming out of the oak. All of the vanillins in that wood when you char them and toast them, it really pulls them out, and you start getting that dulce de leche, caramelly vanilla, roasted vanilla flavors that merge so well with the whiskey.
Okay, so before we leave this, I want to ask you a few questions here because these were
Please.
all single malt. Okay.
Correct.
And
Correct.
so, as you know, the American Craft Spirits Association has been working on definitions for American single malt. And
Mhm.
one of the issues, of course, has been the whole concept of minimum aging, which is something that you in the South have been arguing against. Can you tell us what's going on in the world of American single malt and the standards and all that stuff?
I can give you a couple of highlights. If you look at the ASM website, the American Single Malt Commission website, and you look at, call it, I don't know, I think it's probably like 10 different factors that they think should be part of the definition of what American single malt is. You will find that there is an aging piece that is notably absent from that list of American single malt. And I think that's intentional, not because there's so many folks that want to be able to release it early, but they really are looking at the totality of the American climate and different terroirs and saying, you really should leave it up to the whiskey makers to make the best whiskey possible and let them decide what the right aging regimen is. I'm sure Mr. Keegan would agree down in New Mexico. I bet you folks, Falcones would probably like to have that kind of flexibility depending on the year.
Yep.
And look, it's going to produce very different tasting whiskeys. I mean, if you put Whiskey Del Bach up against, I shouldn't even say up against, alongside Virginia Distillery, Westland, Westward, all four of them are going to taste very different from one another, despite the fact that they're all 100% malted barley. And a big part of that is climatic conditions, approach to whiskey making, and that's what makes it a horse race. That's what will make this category so innovative and interesting, because it doesn't all taste the same.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned that and some of those others. There's a guy named Alan Bishop. Do you know Alan Bishop?
I have not had the opportunity yet. No.
Okay. So Alan Bishop, I've only met him online. He's a distiller in southern Indiana. Okay. And he does a lot of stuff online. He hosts a lot of roundtable discussions, distillers discussions. And one discussion that I watched, and I even was commenting during, was an American single malt session. And Mark was on there. And also Murphy Quint from Cedar Ridge was there, and a few others. And they were talking about that, how the regions are so different because this country is so damn big. And there's so many different climate areas and water sources and different types of wood and everything and different types of barley that it's tough to categorize because, as one, because they're all so different, but they're also good. It's yeah, and bringing it back to this, this is also very, very good. I'm really, really enjoying this. All four of these single malts have been really drinkable. One thing we didn't talk about for everybody here, price points before we move on to the rye. Can you tell us about the price points on the Dorado and the Classic first?
The Classic and the Dorado right now are priced at $55 and $60 retail, respectively. We're probably going to be moving the Classic up to $60 and just line pricing with Dorado next year. Okay. But for now, frequently you'll find about a $5 difference between them. Okay. The global casks, of which the Normandy is one, there are three. There's the Normandy, the Frontera, which is our PX sherry finished whiskey, and Ode to Isla, which is our super smoky mesquite sort of flagship. We call it flagship. Dorado's a flagship, but it's our really mesquite smoked global cask offering, which is actually dropping this weekend. It's an annual release. All the Global Cask Collection whiskeys only come out once a year. We make about 1,400 bottles of each.
And it's all at the distillery, though, right? And it's also only available at the distillery.
No. Well, no. They just have much more limited distribution. So yeah, okay. I mean, to a degree, yes, but If you go on our website, you can order them on the website and we can ship to 41 states now. So if you go on
So
the
that,
website,
okay,
right
well,
now-
I need to stop you. I need, because I got, there I got a little confused. Okay,
Okay.
so you have, okay, so we have in front of us here, okay, we have the fall release distiller's cut, and we have the Normandy, okay? So the Normandy, you say, is what's called a global release, is that correct?
called part of our global cask collection, Frontera, Normandy, and Ode Island.
Okay,
Those
so that's
are
your
available
global
online.
collection.
Yep,
Global collection, that stuff is available online,
correct,
limited release.
correct.
Okay, and is it available for shipping to Illinois? Because Illinois is a weird state.
I believe it is. I believe Illinois is a state we can ship into out of a retailer.
Okay,
The ones that you
and
can't, Utah and a couple other control
okay,
states.
and are the global releases like the Normandy ever available on retail shelves around the country, or is it only?
Yeah, yes, but it's a lot harder to find outside Arizona. Your best bet probably. Now, some of the Total Wines, for example, if you have a Total Wine in your
How
market,
about Benny's? How about
you might
Benny's? How
find
about Benny's
some.
in Chicagoland?
I'm working with Benny's right now to try to increase our SKU offering in there. So at the
Okay.
show, Kent spoke with Brett over
yeah.
at Benny's, and I left him a phone message today. We're going to see what we can do with Benny's in the next couple of months and
Okay.
really try to expand that.
In your next email, tell him that
Yeah.
Gil and his group like the Normandy.
Well, I shall.
Okay.
I shall.
All right.
And
So
you
then the
know,
difference between the global releases and then this fall release is what? That's what I didn't understand.
Okay. So the fall distillers, any of the distillers cut, spring, summer, fall, those are only for Whiskey Club members.
Okay. Got it.
Right now, Whiskey Club
Understood.
folks have to be Arizona based or at least Arizona mailing address in order for us to get it to you.
Perfect. And then on the global releases, what's the average price?
$90.
Okay. Got it. Perfect. We cleared it all up. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Love
And
it.
then the distillers cuts are about 120. But I mean, they're
Great.
overproof, all that stuff. Yeah.
All right, wonderful. So let's finish up before we open it up to questions with the Sentinel Rye. Okay, so
Sure.
I was very happy to see a rye in there because I'm a big rye fan, and I'm really curious about, rye in a very hot climate, So can you tell me about the Sentinel? Where do you get the rye grain from?
Okay. So this is our only sourced whiskey.
Aha, that answers
We
it.
buy 95.5 rye whiskey, 2 to 3 year age straight rye whiskey from MGP in Indiana.
As soon as you said 95.5.
Yeah. Yep.
A whole bunch of us, as soon as you said 95.5, we knew. Okay, so
Right.
what is it about the Sentinel that is different from other ryes from MGP?
Right. So we knew when we launched this 1 year ago, like a year to the day, that the market had all the rye that it needed, probably. And if we were going to go into the rye category, we needed to do something different to justify our existence. One of the things we decided to do was we like the idea of trying to bring this idea of Southwest terroir, Sonoran Desert terroir to our whiskeys. So like, how can we do that with a sourced whiskey? We don't have any prejudice against sourced whiskey as long as you're transparent about it.
Right.
Rye does not grow terribly well in Arizona, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Yep.
So sourcing it made sense. And to be honest, sourcing it also gave us a little bit of a supply hedge as well, because Whiskey No Bock takes a year to make. We can buy as much MGP rye as we need to just sort of, some distilleries make vodka in order to pay some bills. We thought a rye might be a nice way to balance the portfolio.
Yeah, why not?
So what we decided to do is this. In order to bring that sort of Southwest Sonoran Desert terroir to this whiskey, we decided to introduce the idea of charcoal filtration Sonoran style to the whiskey. So what do we do? So it's just like the Lincoln County process, except it's not sugar maple charcoal. What we do is the Dorado wood that we smoke that barley over, that leftover wood, we take that charcoal and we filter this rye whiskey over that Dorado mesquite charcoal.
Interesting.
Now I'm probably telling the story out of order. But as soon as the rye whiskey shows up to the distillery, we'll throw it into X Dorado casks for 2 to 3 months, even 1 to 3 months. It could be less.
Right.
1 to 3 months, depending on the time of year when we get it. If it's
Right.
the dead of summer, it only needs to be in there a month. So it picks up some of those Dorado notes. Not a lot, actually. Really, where
Mhm.
that if you were to taste that next to say like Redemption Rye or Bullet Rye, and then drink that next to it, when you see that taste difference, it's really the mesquite charcoal filtering that is bringing that taste difference.
Yeah.
So what I like to sort of talk about is, you get a little bit of the dill notes, the spice notes that
Mhm.
rye brings, but then the filtering over the charcoal mesquite really brings this sort of brown spice, baking spice, cinnamon finish to
Yeah.
it, and really, really rounds the edges of that spice off. Now, if you're a rye head and you like the spiky ryes, you're probably not going to love our rye. But if you like to see a spectrum across rye, I think this really does offer something very different. The flavors are very delicate. I will say that. And
That's delicious. I gotta tell you though,
I personally like.
it's
So
delicious.
I personally like drinking Sentinel over the rocks the best.
Yeah.
It works great in a number of cocktails,
Yeah.
old
This is-
fashions, mules, but I think it actually tastes best and it highlights the flavors best when you drink it on a
Yeah.
cue.
It's very there's something very bright about it. Okay. They're very it's refreshing, I can see enjoying this by the pool, in the summer,
And it's still
it's
90 and it's still 92 proof. I mean,
right.
it stands up in a cocktail because of all that alcohol, but
Right.
it doesn't burn the way you might expect.
No,
in
there's no
92.
burn. Right. Right. That is one thing. There is no burn here. What's the price point on this?
$40.
Yeah,
This is a
Jesus.
relative bargain, in my opinion.
And is this
You can
available
get-
on the shelves? It's available on the shelves?
It is available on the shelf. You can buy it through our website as well. So the only thing you can't readily get outside of Arizona on our website are the distiller's cuts, because those are whiskey club offerings. But
Right,
the
got it.
3 core items, what we call our core items, which is classic Dorado and Sentinel Rye, and all the global casks, while supplies last on the global casks, because we only do 1,400 bottles a year of each one of those. Benny's should have classic and Dorado at the very least.
Yeah,
They
no, it
don't
does.
have
Benny's
Sentinel
definitely
yet,
has.
but it's
So Benny's definitely has classic and Dorado. One of the ways that I learned about you is that a few of us on here we support a homeless shelter, and every year at one of their annual fundraisers, we curate and staff a craft whiskey table at the fundraiser. And this is how many of us learned about craft whiskeys over the years, because we select the whiskeys with the help of Brett. Okay.
Okay, all right,
And
great.
so we actually walked the aisles, and so he introduced me to Whiskey Delback several years ago when we featured you as one of the whiskeys on the table then. Okay.
Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate that support.
No,
Thank
no,
you.
it's our pleasure. And then also, we do an annual tasting with Brett, and so he's introduced us to a lot of these things. So we're good friends with him, and I know for a fact that whiskey, Delback and Classic are almost always on the shelves. I find them frequently, and they are reasonably priced. The Sentinel I didn't know about, so that makes me very happy, because that's a very
Well, like I
reasonable
said,
price.
Sentinel's only been around a year. We haven't even,
Ah.
I don't know if we've cracked into
Hmm.
our third batch of making it. And that's gonna be our priority number one when we speak to Brett again.
Yeah.
Is to find out if he seemed to really like the Sentinel. So I'm really excited about that. And also, listen, if we can get the global casks in, we're happy to do a tasting with them of the global casks.
Well,
We didn't send any to that craft show because we had limits on what we were allowed to taste in terms of quantity. So
Well,
we focused
as you
on-
know, there weren't enough people there anyway, so
Right.
And I want to tell everybody this right now, because Jake and I were talking about this before. Many of you got an email from Eric and me a few days ago. There was a craft spirits show at Binny's on Thursday night. Several of the people here were on it, but not everybody, or attended, but not everybody. It was one of the best whiskey shows that I've been to, okay, in terms of really appreciating craft spirits. It was a bunch of smaller regional distilleries, many of them American distilleries, and some top people were there. The CEO of Whiskey Delback was there. Okay, Cheeseman was there. The founder of Westward was there. Okay, Tom was there. Colin Keegan was there. Okay, Ari Klofter was there. It's Nick Nagley was there. I mean, it was an amazing event. And I've got to tell, and next year we're going to let everybody know about this earlier. We're going to get a big discount for our group to get in there. It was truly one of the best events I've been to in terms of interacting with the top people at those distilleries. Okay, so we definitely got to work on that next year. So, Jake, I'm gonna to everybody's joy and pleasure. I'm gonna shut up right now for a second. Okay, but you have one more thing to say before we go into questions.
Yeah, I want to apologize, guys. I didn't have the chat open for the bulk of this because I wanted to make sure that I could reference additional information. I had some cheat sheets open. So the ones I can see, Old Pueblo. Yeah, so what Old Pueblo is, here's a very quick story on Old Pueblo. Old Pueblo is our mesquited distillate before it goes into the barrel.
Oh, wow.
And the way that came about is when Stephen was first making this mesquited distillate, he invited members of the Tucson Bartenders Guild down to his garage to taste what he had created before it went into a barrel. And they all liked it so much locally that they started bringing it into their bars and replacing tequila and mezcal drinks with this White Dog mesquite distillate. And that's why they call it Old Pueblo, which is the name of the original town center of Tucson. That's literally the first thing they sold was Old Pueblo.
Where's that available?
You can get it. You can get it at the distillery. I don't think they sell it much outside Arizona. It really tends to be sort of like a bartender favorite. It's almost like a secret handshake.
Applebaum says that Binny's has it.
It's possible because they initially they started selling it, out into retail. You can find it in a couple retail places here, but it's become more and more of an on-premise play. Binny's might very well have it. I haven't been to Binny's in years, so I'm definitely overdue for a visit.
Yes, you are overdue for a visit, and let us know when you're coming, and then we'll go to Delilah's together. Okay.
That'd be true.
Okay. All right. So, Eric, I'm not forgetting you tonight. You like that? I'm not skipping over you. So everybody, I'm gonna mute myself right now, and Eric is gonna take over the questions and answers. And we're gonna start with Eric. Take it away.
Okay, thank you. So one question, because I know you said that you're always using new American oak barrels, the 15-gallon barrels. Have you experimented at all with reusing your barrels? And can you keep them in there longer because you're not extracting as much out of the oak?
We will use second use barrels a little bit, but 90% of what we use is first make, and then we sell off most of the used barrels. If we have some kind of overlap or we got to put some into a second use, we'll do that. But primarily we'll sell the used barrels either to beer producers or consumers, and you can buy used barrels this weekend.
Okay. Have you tried to keep them in there longer with the reused barrels, or just because the heat you lose too much?
No, so to answer your question, yes, but we don't do it with a lot. Maybe 10% of our make is in second use barrels. We really we just want to, because we only have 12 months or so to age, we really want maximum flavor coming out of the barrels. And every use, the barrel gives less and less back to the whiskey. So we'll do it in a pinch because so much more of our make is in new make barrels. So it's fine. But I think, by and large, we try to sell off our second use when we can.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I think there was a question in the chat too about what does it come off the still at? I want to say, guys, please don't hold me to this. I want to say 130 proof. I want to say that's what it comes off at. I have to double check with Mark. It might vary by whiskey, but I want to say it comes off at 130. I could be wrong.
Okay, cool. I'm going to open up for questions. Ariel Tusher, you were first.
Hi there, Jake. This was great. Thank you very much. So as Gil mentioned, a bunch of us like to smoke meat in our spare time.
Yes.
And we know that the wood you use to smoke has a lot to do with what you do, and different meats like different woods. So the obvious question, are you thinking of experimenting with other woods for your smoke?
Yes. I'm so excited that you brought that up. Absolutely. I brought that up with Mark several times. It's a little bit of walk before you run, but 100%. because I think there's some lovely Arizona native woods that might offer more unique flavor profiles to the whiskey. It would probably be along the lines of a global cask collection, limited release sort of thing. But we absolutely are doing that. We have to sort of play would you rather right now, but Mark's always doing crazy mad scientist stuff in the back. And it really would be more about smoking the barley over different types of wood. We tried doing mesquite barrels once, and it was a disaster. One, they don't blend to cooperage. A guy almost lost a finger making a barrel, and the whiskey or the wood is so flavorful and intense that actually aging it in the barrel produces not such a great result. We're much better off smoking the grain when it comes to mesquite. But there's other things. There's ironwood. There's all kinds of Arizona woods that we could play around with. They're resinous, but like things like alligator juniper up in the mountains it's an evergreen wood. It smells incredible on a fireplace. To buy it here, it's like $400 a quart or something absurd like that. So there's different woods that are at higher elevations that smell wonderful on a fireplace, and it's just a function of playing around and seeing how they taste when you smoke the barley over it.
Great. I think you hinted that the earlier iterations had a bit more smoke to them, and you kind of toned it down for wider palates. That global release bottle that you mentioned, is that closer to the original incarnation?
It is. In terms of intensity, yes. There's a couple of different blending sort of levers that he pulls for that, but yes, the Ode to Isla intensity is a lot closer to the first, I will call it the first perfected Dorado. But that, and look, there are people that loved that intensity, but there are a bunch of people who are like, Jesus Christ, I can't drink something that intense. It's too much smoke. So, over 10 years or so, they've tried to dial it in on what's the sweet spot. And Dorado and Classic right now is a 50-50 split of sales.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Which surprised me. I thought that Classic would have gone to like an 80-20 thing by now, but it hasn't. It's pretty 50-50.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ted, you're next.
Yeah, I'm here. I just want to say I'm jealous. All 5 of these were fantastic tonight. And I live in Knoxville, Tennessee, so I cannot get the product like the rest of these people can.
You might be able to. So funny story, tragic story, funny story. We were distributed in Nashville through a distributor called Delirium, and they ended up going out of business because their warehouse burnt down. But we are out in that marketplace in Nashville and nowhere else. So
I agree with that. I go to Total Wine an awful lot because they're the biggest. We only have 2 stores, one in Nashville, one in Knoxville. The one in Nashville has the Dorado and the Classic. The one in Knoxville has none. The one in Knoxville outsells in whiskey Nashville, where Nashville outsells Knoxville in wine. You might want to get your people on down to go ahead and try to see if you can get it in, because all 5 of these were utterly fantastic tonight.
So. We definitely, thank you so much. We will definitely work on that. The change with our distributor in Tennessee happened in the last month. So we may have to reach out to Total Wine and figure out an alternate way to get them additional product for that one store. We've had great luck with them. We've actually never been able to actually talk to them. They'll just order. Like we just got 4 or 5 cases sent to Florida through LibDib without us asking for anything. Like they're just, for whatever reason, they seem to be interested. Thank God for us. And they just start putting it in stores without us even asking. It's weird.
Okay. Well, if you need some help, I might be able to help you get them into the Total Wines here. I do tastings in the both Total Wines, and almost exclusively.
I'll tell you what, if you can tell me a distributor in Tennessee that's in business, I would love to talk to a distributor in Nashville.
I hate distributors. I'm sorry.
I know, but I need them. The law dictates that I have to work through them.
I'll tell you what, Gil, can you go ahead and send me contact information? I'll email them a couple distributors that I do work with.
Absolutely, Ted. Ted, I will put you in direct contact with Jake. This will happen.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Ted.
William Myers, you're up.
Yes, so I had questions. So you said it comes off the still at about 65%. Do you barrel it at the same proof, or do you water it down? I know some places they like.
No, it depends on the whiskey. That's a great question. Thank you for that. We do proof down. We use reverse osmosis to waterproof. Because our core whiskeys we proof down to 92. The global casks we proof down to 97, and then our cask, we will call cask strength. If and how we have to proof those down, we proof them down to, usually between 104 and 110. And just as another quick finishing note on that, in case anybody was interested, two things we never do: chill filter. We don't chill filter. Mark makes that decision because he believes that, when you remove those lipids, that's another flavor component for our whiskeys, and he'd rather have cloudy whiskey out of the freezer than a less flavorful whiskey. And we never add caramel color. It's okay. We understand that some people need to do that, particular larger brands, if they're looking for consistency across product visually. Mark's opinion, and I share it, as craft distillers, you are going to have visual inconsistencies as part of something that is handmade. And so we are okay with the occasional variance in color. So we opt not to use caramel color.
And then I was going to ask, you're still, how big is it? It's a pot still?
Yeah, it's a copper pot still. It's 500 gallons.
Where's it made?
I believe they got it from Scotland. I've been with the company since Memorial Day, so I still have lots to learn, but I want to say that they got that still from Scotland. Don't quote me on it, but I believe that's the case.
Probably says on like the door, it'll say like Forsyth or something like that, Aberdeen or something
Yeah,
like that.
I'd have to look. And by the way, everyone's invited to come on down and look at the still. When you come down for a tour, they show you everything.
Awesome. And then lastly, the distiller's cuts, those are all different every year, but the things like global releases are all the same. So once a year you'll do the Normandy, might be a little different than last year's batch of Normandy.
Yes, correct. So the Frontera is always a PX sherry finished product. Normandy is always Calvados, and Ode to Isla is always just a more intense mesquite blend, smoked blend of whiskeys. The distiller's cuts, this is the way it did work. At one point we had 4 distillers on staff, and they rotated. So it was 3. Actually, at one point it was 4 distillers cut releases per year, and a different distiller would make the final blend determination for that one. That's why, like for the fall cut, we call it Dustin's blend, because Dustin is the one that assembled that blend. We had a previous distiller who still works with us part-time, named Abby. And Abby did the summer cut. That was her cut. So when we say distiller's cut, I mean, at least historically, when we had more people, there was one person who was deciding, out of all the barrels we have, this is what I like. And then they would taste it as a team, and they'd make a determination like, this is going to be the summer cut, or the spring cut, or the fall cut.
Is there still more?
So next year, the fall cut will probably not be a Tawny Port Sauterne blend. It'll be something else.
Is there more of Dustin's cut available if you join the club? Is there more of Dustin's cut available if you join the club?
100%. Yes. And by the way, if you, I mean, it's a long way to go. But if you have any friends who go down to Arizona or Tucson and bring you some back, that's another way to go. But we just released fall cut not even a month ago, so we still have probably 70 cases worth. So we still have plenty of fall cut.
One of my friend's sister lives down there, so not a problem.
If you want to connect me with her, I'm happy to coordinate it, but they can just literally walk right in the door. And I still think we have some spring and summer too. You could do a trifecta on the distiller's cut. Yeah. The one thing we don't have anything left of at the distillery today is Ode to Isla. That's going to change in 2 days' time. We'll have our newest release of Ode to Isla is dropping on Friday.
So, William, you can wait 3 days and get all 4 bottles.
You sure can. You could probably actually get all 6, because I think we have a few Frontera left at the distillery. So
That's the case.
you could shoot the moon and get all six.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Eric, we have one more question, right? Todd, is that right?
Yeah, Luigi, you're up.
Yeah, I was told I have to put the hat back on to ask my question, so I'll do that. So Jake, thank you again for this. One thing that the group here will tell you I'm always sort of banging on about is the concept of terroir in whiskey, especially among American craft. And I can tell that that's really part of Whiskey Del Bac's story, between the mesquite and playing around with, native woods and things. Have you given any thought to native grains? I know you've got some wheat and some corn out there in Arizona. Have you thought about incorporating any of that in the future?
Yes. There are a couple of farmers who have played around with barley that works in Arizona. They're working with, I believe, the University of Arizona on their their agricultural arm to see if they can figure out a strain that'll grow in Arizona. They've also done something similar with rye. Australia has actually made a lot of strides in growing rye in the dry, arid parts of South Australia. And they've got some beautiful whiskeys that are coming out of Australia that are rye, that are made with basically these heritage, dry, hot weather strains, which are really interesting. We've definitely looked at it. We're in conversations with them. The problem is scale. None of them are at a place where they can scale it yet. But we continue to have the conversation. Stephen Paul, our founder, knows these people. He's met with them personally, and we will continue to have those conversations. Right now, like I said, American single malts are focused. If we could figure out a way to source rye out of Arizona, I think that'd be a really interesting something to experiment with, to see if we can make an Arizona rye, and does that change the flavor of our Sentinel in a good way, sufficiently to say, hey, we should switch over. But again, it's really a function of scale right now.
Cool. Well, don't mess with the Sentinel. It's terrific. But
or maybe it's a second. Yeah, maybe it's a second SKU or something like that. Where we love your idea, and that's exactly where our founder and distillers' heads are. Is can we work with more native woods? Can we work with native grains? We've got a real big gin head at the company who wants us to play around with Arizona botanicals, and can we launch a gin? So we definitely do not have a shortage of ideas. It's a function of what can we actually execute well. But these are all wonderful ideas, and we are looking at them. We are.
Great. I can't wait to see where you go from here. Thanks.
Thank you. Same.
Wonderful. So, Jake, just to let you know that when we finish the actual session and the recording, we do adjourn to, sort of like an open session and after party afterwards. So please stay around for a little bit for that.
Please.
But before we do that, what I'd like to do now is I would like everybody to unmute, please, and really thank Jake, not only for sending us, 10 bottles, which is amazing, but also for filling in at the last minute for Mark and doing so in such a wonderful job. I'm going back and I'm going to say cheers with the fall release, because this is a flavor bomb. This smacks me right in the face in a good way. I love this thing. So everybody, if you can please join me in saying cheers and thank you to our special guest, Jake Wheatley.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Yeah, Jake, this was amazing. Do you have any last words before we turn off the recording?
No. Just listen. I'm so thrilled to be able to do this. I will say I was a touch nervous, but you guys create such a conversational and collegial environment. I didn't freak out as much by being able to simply say, I don't know. I'll have to talk to Mark, because Mark's the one who makes all of this. And as a sales and marketing guy, I'm usually running around with my head cut off. But it's so nice to be actually able to talk to folks who care about the product and are curious about the product and are so knowledgeable. And I get to learn from you, and I hope I get to do a bunch of these with you guys going forward. Thank you so much for inviting me.
That's great. I mean, some of us have been drinking together for almost 20 years. We've known each other for a long time. We've learned a lot from each other and from Brett. And for us, especially, during the pandemic, the Zoom platform allowed us to have these types of conversations, and get to know people like you, in a way that we did not have an ability to do so beforehand. And now post the pandemic, we're doing some things hybrid, we're doing some things in person, but we're still also doing Zoom. And the Zoom allows us to, include people like Ted in Tennessee, and William Myers, in St. Louis, and Rebecca in Boston, and all over the place. And so it's just wonderful. And we really thank you. And again, thank you so much